Wonderful. Wonderful presentations. Martin, bringing together diversity of faiths is a beautiful challenge. And congratulations for that work. Muslims, Buddhists, Hinduists, Catholics, all together working for the same goal. We have been so good in keeping our times that we have a good chunk of time for discussion. So I would like to invite comments and questions to the panelists and to the group. Who would like to start? Please. Keep your comments short so that we can have as many participants as possible.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I would like to start with saying food waste is unavoidable in a society which does not accept food rationing. And it is unavoidable, although we should obviously make every effort to try to keep it to a reasonable level and to as low as possible levels. I would like to address a question more specifically to Mr. Geris. There is a big debate going on, especially in European circles, about giving free food to people as opposed to giving them money to purchase food. It looks like for certain large instances, the giving money is a more dignified way to help people than to giving food. I would like to, and it looks like giving food is more popular in the Mediterranean countries, and it is less popular in the north. Then I would like to ask also another question that deals with ethics as experienced by food banks, and we have many, many more points, but this is also something that is pretty hot on the subject today. Should the recovered food be a source of profit?
Thank you. Two good questions. Money or food? And should food distribution be a source of profit? I will take several questions and then you will answer several of those. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for these inspiring talks and this positive note and all these great examples of things that can happen. I was notably inspired by the remark from Rabbi Abraham, who talked about a new type of narrative and switching the word waste around. Why I think it's so important, because people would like to go towards something and not turn their back. And the word usefulness and value and things you get and you should share, I think we could use that to make the blueprint of where we want to go to. So see the food as something very valuable, something we have a right to take some of what we need, as was just explained, but not too much, and use that in a positive discourse. So I also see food waste is perhaps an intermediate word, and perhaps we could all think ahead. What is the blueprint of the positive, valuable food in production and consumption?
You. Two more questions, one here and one there, and then you go in the next round.
Thank you very much for such an inspiring session. I guess one of the things that came across so clearly was the consistency across all the speakers calling for the same thing. And I think if I might put it in a slightly different way, what we're really saying is we need to change the social norm back to valuing food again. Because most of human history, we did value food. We weren't wasteful in the way we are now at anything like the same scale. So I guess the key thing that for me that comes out of this is how do we start mobilizing the faith communities of the world to be part of the solution in changing that social norm. And one of the things that we've tried and we've done some research on is that notion of champions that came across in the last presentation there. How can people become champions and communicate widely to others? And that way, build that social norming could be one way of doing it. I'd love your thoughts on that approach.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to comment. Mine is just a comment that the leaders, Christian and other faith leaders, have a big platform to influence because, you know, their constituents are the people we want to convert. So, for example, yesterday I saw just a tweet from the Pope about this conference has enough influence. A lot of people liking, retweeting, and commenting on the subject of food loss and waste. You know, that it looks small, but this influence, the fact that the Pope acknowledges this as something that needs attention. So how do we get to rally other leaders, faith-based leaders, to move with us, to influence their constituents, so that we speak this language that we need, like the Pope's messages, quoting the Bible, you know, the scriptures that speak to the need, or rather the importance of not wasting food. You know, that in itself, you know, it's backed by scripture. So I think that is influence that we need to tap in from the faith organizations.
Much. I would like to ask the presenters, only those who want to react to any of the questions or comments, and then we go into a second round of questions. Who would like to react? I think that, Mikey, you had a direct question.
Yes, and thank you for that. Very easy questions. I think basically the task is to move beyond the idea of giving people who have no food or money for food, and instead to create a society where all have an equal opportunity to make a decent living. But as we are not there yet, and it will probably take some time, I think that people who have no food should be helped to eat. And whether we do that by bringing them food or bringing them money, I think we should ask them what they find most dignified and how they would like to be helped. I think that we can't sit from a privileged position and tell people what is most dignified for them. I think it depends on the people that we want to help, but I think that the end goal must be to put us in a society where we don't need to help people that way. The other thing, should recovered food be a source of profit? Oh, I hope to avoid that question, because basically I think that food shouldn't be a source of profit. I actually think we should move towards a society where we're not motivated by profit, but by contributing to solving the problems we have. Again, I realize this is a faraway ideal, so I have to be very pragmatic. And in that sense, I would be a utilitarian and say whatever gets the most food into the most mouth is what we should do. But I do think that ideals are important, and I do know that I work at a department for food and resource economics. There's a lot of economists. There's some here as well. They find my notion that people would work for something else than profit to be laughable. But I do think, because I'm coming from a virtue ethics perspective, that we are not fixed in nature, but that we create our nature. It is, as the American atheist Kurt Vonnegut has rightly said, we are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful what we pretend to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikey. Martin, please.
Thank you very much for these very interesting and really at the core of the issue questions. I would like first to address the question about the need to change the social norm, the culture, and how can we mobilize faith people. What we have learned over time is when we come with an issue like this and address a spiritual or faith-based audience, one should not start by mentioning the issue that is at stake. That is what we have learned with climate change, for example. Don't start with climate change. Don't start with the figures. Don't start with the science. Start with the theology and the spirituality of the religion you are speaking to. To take my example, I'm a Christian, I'm a Protestant. I would start speaking about our theology of creation, the mandate we have to be good stewards of creation, and so on. And then I will expose the situation and say, climate change is happening, we are making it happen, and in that way we are unfaithful to what our God-given mandate. And then you move towards practical tips. And so you start with the foundation, and that means that there is not one single narrative, also addressing the narrative and blueprint question. It has to be tailored to the faith that you are addressing. So we've actually done a study with the organization that is called Climate Outrage about climate change, and different words work for different religions. For a Muslim, it would be keeping the balance of the earth that God has commanded us. For a more Dharmic tradition, Buddhism or Hinduism would be being well integrated into the web of life and being compassionate. So these are key words, these are key, and so even though we are often in interfaith initiatives and so on, the initiative might be shared, but the narrative, the key words, how we present it, and even how it is lived out in the communities must be different each time. And that is really something we have learned that is key to mobilizing people. And that's why we need not only religious leaders, but also spiritual leaders, theologians, people who have the authority to address the root core theological, ethical element to these questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Martin. Marcelo?
I think that the question of giving money or giving food, the more important thing is to teach to the people to work, to obtain food, and to not lose or waste food. The activity to, as say St. Paul say, look, we need to work to obtain the food of the daily food, we need to work, say St. Paul. And I think that especially today, we need also to come back to learn to the people that they need to work to obtain food and not to lose food. So it's more, of course, we need also to give money or to give all things to the people to need this, but this is a provisional situation. The more important thing is that the people understand that need to be responsible to obtain the food and to not lose the food or waste the food. The other thing, to be influential, I think that it's just, and for this reason, the specific question of this book is to convoke the religions to work together. Of course, each religion can work in his domain, in his ambitus, to his family, to his community, but it's also important, and this is the new thing, to work together, because to defend the planet, to defend the food, to defend against to lose or waste the food is very important, and we can work together, not only independently in each community, but work together. And I think this is very important, and this is the new form of interreligious dialogue and ecumenism that we can do today. Thank you.
So much. We will go now into a second round of questions, and we have you first, second, Santiago, and Salim, Roy, and you. So we start.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask if any of the speakers have ideas on two topics I would like to raise. One is the power of money. The power of money, or the power of finance. And we could look at that, I guess, in two ways. One is a positive power. Actually, money makes a whole lot of things possible, including investment in reducing food loss. The word power is very often also a negative word, an evil power, or people enriching themselves too much. And for a very basic human need as food, or healthcare, or education, we often struggle with the profit-making in the industry. That sometimes seems to be in conflict with the basic human need. So that is one topic of discussion. The other is the topic of interreligious collaboration. There's a lot of religious tension in the world. Of course, very recently in India, where ground is debated between different religions, but that has been happening in Israel, of course, for so long. On the other hand, sometimes we have very positive experience. One of the best things that happened ever to me in my work was collaboration with the Caliph. It's a very loaded word today, but the Caliph of northern Senegal, who actually gave his support and blessing to a rice project we were doing there. And
Thank you.
so maybe we can have some thoughts about these two things. Thank you.
Super. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been really interesting to me listening to the faith elements of consumption, but I'm really interested in your thoughts on the faith elements of the production end and the ethics of production. The two continents that I'm most familiar with, Africa, it is women's unpaid labor that is essential to production. So when we waste, when we have loss, is a loss of these women's labor. In the US, food is wasted because food is cheap. Food is cheap in the US because the producers, the farm workers, work in legally unprotected spaces. The farm labor is not covered under US labor laws. And so I would just be really keen to, it feels to me like the consumption end is not the only end of this chain that has religious and moral and ethical issues. The production end is also deeply steeped in a wrong ethics, if I could be that simplistic. So that's one question. And then I'm also curious if any of you are engaging with traditional African religious thought. I've heard about Hinduism, Eastern thought, the Western tradition. I'm curious about African traditions.
Thank you. Very good questions. Santiago.
Yes, for Mr. Kopp. You're worried about how do we spread this good news. We have good news here to spread. We got technologies, we got consensus to how to stop the waste. And we can go out and be sent 2 by 2. I know that it works, even though we are much more than 12 to go there outside. But we can take a message that is religious and also about common sense, of not wasting our food. We need to have some way to have a universal message all over the world, a simple message. It's not easy, I know it's not easy to do so. Maybe the date, having a September 29 as the date of food and loss and waste may help. And at the same time, I think we have to work much more about the art of sharing, because sharing is not that easy. And here we share a lot of information that we should know how to broadcast this and share it outside. And at the same time, I want to enhance the comment of Monsignor Sanchez-Orondo that, of course, the bread, we can earn our bread with the sweat, with our brows, no? That's said in the Bible. So to dignify people, the better way is to earn their own food. But of course, we have to be there. But the question is, how can we spread all this that we are doing outside this area?
Thank you, Santiago. Selina?
Oh, it does work. Good. I want to ask the panel about how do we make prevention more ethical? Because right now, a lot of us are talking about the giving food to poor people, which is very, very important and very good. I have to underline that. But giving the food, surplus food, or via apps like Too Good To Go or other good apps, with all the respect, I mean, we also need to address the root of the problem. We also need to address the prevention. And I know it's, as you said, it's very ethical to give food to poor people, and of course we need to do that, and of course we need to continue to do that, but we also, how do we also focus on making prevention ethical thing, to prevent the food waste to begin with? Because if we just have some food and just give it, and continue to give it, we will not address the beginning of the value chain, the overproduction itself. How do we make the overproduction unethical? This is my question for the panel of ethics.
Very good question, Serena. Ray.
I heard a lot of very common themes across everybody's talk, which is around this recognition that the collective life of humanity requires us to consider others rather than ourselves, and there's a lot of forces of light in the world that are moving us, but I think we also have to recognize the forces of darkness, and specifically, I think we mentioned materialism, avarice, greed, like how to deal with that. And I just wanted to share this one passage from the Baha'i international community, that the forces of materialism promote a quite contrary line of thinking to what we've just heard, that happiness comes from constant acquisition, that the more one has, the better, that worry for the environment is for another day. These seductive messages fuel an increasingly entrenched sense of personal entitlement, which uses the language of justice and rights to disguise self-interest. We use the language of justice and rights to disguise self-interest. Indifference to the hardship experienced by others becomes commonplace, while entertainment and distracting amusements are voraciously consumed. The enervating influence of materialism seeps into every culture, and everyone recognizes that unless they strive to remain conscious of its effects, they may, to one degree or another, unwittingly adopt the ways of seeing the world. And I'm curious how you see those forces and what we can do to address them.
I think, Joachim, you have to extend this workshop for another day. Joachim, and then Ismail, and then we close, and the panel. You will respond, okay?
Well, I don't want to be out of order.
Yeah, as a respondent.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Joachim?
I want to respond to the thought about evil and about bringing people together.
Yeah, but maybe when all respondents react. Okay,
yes,
thank
sure.
you.
Okay. This is a very inspiring and important session. The religious communities reach people directly, be it in church, on holidays, or be it by Twitter. That's a huge opportunity to communicate in order to potentially change minds. I would like to come back to the simple structure of our conference about losses and waste. It seems to me easier for the religious community to address the latter rather than the former, to address waste, and it's
unethical aspects rather than to address the losses. Mind you that the losses are mostly in developing countries and are to a large extent an issue of lack of access to technology, to markets, to knowledge, to finance. Panelists correct my impression that you are mostly focusing from a religious perspective on the waste issues in the rich countries, which will have tremendous positive effects for the environmental destructive side, but which will have very limited effect on cutting hunger, which we have learned in the presentations yesterday. Is it not necessary that the religious communities and Catholic Church up front are as much technology advocates, finance advocates, policy change advocates in order to address the loss issue?
Thank you. Good question. And our last question, Ishmael?
Thank you. There are loss issues and waste issues that are arising from how the value chain is governed, particularly the power relations between the different actors on the chain, and more specifically between the producers and those that are higher up the chain. I just wondered whether issues of equity and fairness in the distribution of value, as well as of risk, is an ethical issue that is worth also looking at, because ultimately it affects production. It also affects the way the producers might end up in a loss situation and throw away food because of the quality standards that may not necessarily be scientifically determined, because of the behavior of the supermarkets in terms of private standards, as well as other issues that are to do more about the transparency and accountability of the different parties that are interacting along the chain.
Thank you. Thank you, Ishmael. Because of time limitations, we need to move on to give some space to each one of the panelists. And because of time limitations, don't try to answer all the questions, but the one that touches your heart and your mind most. And we'll start with the last one. Martin, please.
It's hard to choose. So there was one question that was directly addressed to me about the question of having a universal message. I think that in any interfaith initiative, indeed, you have to have the two elements: a universal message that we can define together, and then tailored messages that go through institutional and faith-specific channels to the communities. Now, I want to stress that for the universal message, what I've learned time and again is it is important to craft this message all together. You don't need to come with a first draft that someone would write and then we discuss. From the very start, put people of different faith at the table and work on it together. I've done that several times with climate change, interfaith declarations that went to UNFCCC, because sometimes this language is very tricky. Christians speak of creation, Buddhists not necessarily. There is not necessarily a reference to transcendence. And so it is a great place, the very fact or the very act of crafting a universal message is already part of the interfaith collaboration. And we need both indeed, especially also if we want to be heard by people who have convictions, but not necessarily faith convictions. And I think that this already points to the fact that interfaith collaboration on food waste, climate change, or other issues has one key dimension, and that speaks also to the question about conflict. It shows that across differences of worldviews, beliefs, and values, we can still work together. Yeah. And that is a powerful message that is sent into the world. Let me share one example. I was in an interfaith panel on TV in France after the attacks in Paris for COP21. It was recorded before the attacks, but it was broadcast the day after. So we did not speak at all about the attacks in Paris. The mere fact that on TV you had representatives of all religions around the same table, that touched a lot, many people. So in every place where it is possible to have these people, and I'm well aware that in some countries or areas it is a hard sell, we should take that road because it speaks more generally to the pacification, reconciliation, building of bridges in a world that is becoming fragmented everywhere, and people are, putting themselves behind walls and taking only their national community interest at heart.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much, Martin, and sorry to cut you, but we need to close. Ken, please.
Yes, so I believe the linkage between what Joachim said about getting at the post-harvest loss, it's linked to peace that you brought up, Yolanda, is the key to doing that. That's why the theme from our symposium this year was Pax Agricultura, peace through agriculture. It's the same road that will allow losses to be diminished as can bring peace. And the final point is that I would say in terms of inter-religion collaboration in this regard was that in 2012, our prize went to an Israeli Jewish irrigation pioneer named Daniel Hillel. And the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, came to Des Moines to join in presenting the prize to him because he had been nominated by 3 Muslim scientists from 3 Muslim and Arab countries, and have a moment of when interface, and in the audience are Hindus and Buddhists and Christians, everyone standing, cheering for this achievement in a moment that could help build peace through agriculture.
Fantastic, lovely example. Mikey?
Yes, I think a lot of the questions revolved around economics, which is obviously a good way to look at this. And I think that what I've thought about yesterday was very much that if we think that we can really solve the problems of food waste and food loss, which is basically symptoms of hunger, poverty, climate change, biodiversity loss, and we can continue to use the same tools that have created them, basically neoliberal capitalism, we are joking ourselves. And therefore I think there is a very close connection between talking about the overindulgence and greed of the Western world, stopping that, and then using the surplus to help the people that you were talking about. So I don't think that it's easier or more convenient for religious communities to deal with personal waste of the Western consumer than deal with structural problems of hunger in the third world. I think they are deeply, deeply interconnected. But if you want to talk to the Western consumer, it might be a good idea to begin talking to him or her about his or her actions instead of becoming too abstract. I think at least that's why I chose to do what I do. I deeply agree with the quote that you came with, that we have created a culture of self-indulgence, and we have even become so ashamed of it that we have become willfully blind to the consequences of what we are doing. Yeah. And that connects to Mr. Vox's remark. Money can do very good things, but they can also be a motive for greed and egoism, and if we can use them for good things, we should do that, but the motivation behind earning them might be worth looking into. And finally, and I'll finish, I think that the story that Rabbi Berkovich told about saving a little food each day and putting the money in a jar is exactly the kind of narrative we need. We can either do this by telling people what is happening, by informing them. We have been doing that for many years, and it seems people are becoming more and more willfully blind to the problem. We can try to be moralist. We can moralize and tell people this is not worthy of us as ethical beings. What typically happens is that people look at you and say, what about yourself? Greta Thunberg is a good example of that. So if we want to motivate people, we cannot come with only information or shame. We have to come with opportunities. We have to come with new narrative of what a good human existence is. Absolutely. An existence that includes both helping people who are in need and the rest of nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikey. Thank you so much. Abraham?
There's so much to unpack and a lot of common threads. but I was taken by what Selena said was very interesting. Why does it have to be connected to feeding someone that doesn't have? If we lived in a world where everyone had all their food needs met and there was no hunger, so basically Messiah came and we live in a utopia, then we still would not be allowed to waste God's food. We still would have, we are forever obligated not to waste something that is useful because it is not ours. Just like we could never harm our own body. So it's very interesting that in Judaism, the idea of not waste, it's called Bal Tashchis. Everyone knows it's the worst thing. We're against anything that just burns and wastes, destructs money or possessions, but especially food. You're not allowed to throw food in the garbage. You have to, for sure, recycle it, but if not, feed it to the birds. Everything has its use and its purpose. The reason why we keep putting it into the way of how do you balance it with those that don't have is because it's a moral imperative that if one of the reasons for sure why I wouldn't waste is because if you can help me feed someone else, I would not waste. I saw an amazing example yesterday, Las Vegas City Council, a city not known for virtue and is known as the city of sin. They said that you can pay for parking tickets, double parking, and all different other kinds of legal violations. You could pay it by donating surplus food in your cabinet to a food bank. And they said it's only valid for the week of Thanksgiving. I said, wow, I mean, they really should do it all year and it should go everywhere because suddenly I won't be so annoyed about the person that's double parked because I said, you know what, the food bank is going to have more food and people won't waste. They're going to take things that are not going to be useful soon and give it to others that could use it. I think when it comes to money, it was a very important question of, can you benefit from money? Should you give money? Should you give food? The answer really goes to what Professor Bagnaro asked yesterday. What's the percent of waste that is tolerable? Right? You know, should we have food that completely is absorbed in our body, that we have no waste? Eventually, I mean, we can have a scientific food program that there's no waste. I think that's something that's not realistic. But we have to find a way to have the least possible waste, but even don't let perfect get in the way of good. So if you can make money and help others and reduce the loss, do it. If you can give people money and let them buy food for more dignity, do it. If you need to give food, do it. As long as there's balance and there's no waste.
Super. Thank you so much, Abraham. And Marcelo, the last words.
Well, I think that we need to consider the news that we have. And the news is that we are today more awareness about the question of climate change, the question of the new form of slaves that we have in the world. And for this reason, we think that we need to work together. The religious people need to work together. Also because, for me, it's new that the United Nations are more interested than in the past to ask the collaboration of religions. Because in the past, you know, they don't say nothing about religion. Today, don't say too much, but something begin to say. And for example, in our meetings, we invite also the different representative of religion. In the past, we don't invite it in question of sciences. So, and this is because the people of the United Nations and all people is more awareness that the religion in general is the soul of the different cultures. So, the religion have a great importance in the life of the people, in the lives of the society, in the history. So, but today we have common problems, and the more important problems are, of course, the problem of the people and the problem of the planet. So the front of this problem, we need to act together. Because in the question of God, and in different notion of God, and in different cultures, and in different ritualities, we have different way and different interpretation. But to defend the human dignity and all the things that are in relation with the human dignity, that is the question of food, production, and also lots of food, we need to have the same ideas. And we can have the same ideas. So this is a great news. And for this, I think it's a new the appeal and the wish of the Pope to work together, to invite to work. Of course, we can work independently and separately in the different communities that we have, but we also can work together.
That's right.
And not to ascend to for example, I come from Japan, and I speak with the leader of the Shintoism. And this leader not understand nothing about climate change, and repeat things that, yes, but what are the problems today? Of course, we have many differences in the considerations of nature. We think that the nature is created by God, of course, and they don't believe in this. In the end, they think that God is nature. Okay, but in the end, in relation of nature, what are the solutions? And in this solution, we can work together. For example, under the idea of sustainable development, the idea of bioeconomy, on these ideas, and the rest, there are the general ideas that we can have together. The importance of the human person, the importance of the common good, the importance of justice. All these things are ethics and are common for all people, and are also we can apply in an universal message for all, but also in a particular thing according to the different countries, different situation, of course. This is very clear.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcelo, and thank you to all. I don't know if you feel, maybe because it's early morning, this has been the most fascinating session up to now. And of course, I thank every one of the panelists, and I just want to close by repeating what you said, Marcelo. Food is an issue of dignity, and if we don't work together, we won't be able to manage responding to a crisis of food loss and waste. Thank you, everybody, and Joachim, you tell us what to do?
Have coffee.